Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a first for us. So this is TCGplayer.com. I'm Conley Woods, and we are bringing you our first video set review, if you will. Going to do things a little differently this time. Obviously, you can probably already tell by the layout and whatnot. But traditionally, we've done kind of a full scope written review, and it's fine. I think it goes kind of well, but it doesn't really capture me as a player all too well. So decided to kind of focus in a little bit more on the brewing aspect of Shadows over Innistrad. Look at cards where they might be in standard, where they might end up in competitive play, where they might end up in rogue deck builder play, where they might just end up in the metagame in general, and where cards could potentially end up in the metagame, even though a lot of them won't. In general, when it comes to set reviews, I have a wider scope than most players. I tend to think more things are viable than most, just because I'm a little more forgiving in terms of niche cards or cards that have restrictive limitations to them. So hopefully we're going to capture that, dig into some awesome Shadows of Innistrad cards. The set is super flavorful, as everyone expected, of course. It has a lot of awesome cards. And over the week, we're going to bring you different amounts of cards every day. Today, we're probably going to stick to white artifacts and lands. And we're not going to go over every single card. We're going to go over cards that are interesting, cards that are fun to talk about, cards that are strong, etc. The random limited fodder we'll probably leave aside. And then for the rest of the week, we'll be moving on to the other colors, rounding out the week with the double face cards. So if you are like, hey, where's my Avacyn? Why isn't she here first or whatever? We'll be doing the double face cards at the end of the week, just because that's the way that they are broken down on the official WotC spoiler. And then also be doing like a top 8 breakdown at the end of the week. And yeah, over between now and then, we should have a bunch of deck lists, a bunch of deck ideas. I'm going to try to avoid talking about cards that I haven't talked about from the spoiler yet. So today will be the first day, obviously. So a lot of these cards, I'm just going to kind of talk about how they stand on their own and how they stand given the context of current standard as the 4 sets we have, which for anybody that is not familiar, with this set, the standard format will be Dragons of Tarkir, the core set, Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch, and then Shadows of Innistrad. So we lose Khans of Tarkir and what's the Fate Reforged. That's what I'm looking for. We lose those 2 sets, but we do not lose Dragons as of yet. We'll lose that later on. So we're going to look at those 4 sets, the cards that they have that interact with the cards we talk about today, and potential deck ideas. But then as we move further on in the week, we'll have more cards that we'll have talked about, that we will have discovered. So we'll be able to piece together newer, cooler deck lists and whatnot. So hopefully it's kind of an evolving process. And yeah, of course, this is my first time doing this particular style, so feedback is certainly welcome. So be sure to drop down in the comments below any feedback you have, positive or negative. And with that said, yeah, let's jump into some cards here. So right off the bat, I have this blue-white deck here. You might be familiar with it if you pay attention to any of my work. This is a blue-red auras deck, and it's been really fun. But a lot of the deck does rotate out of standard, which is unfortunate. But I have this pulled up to start with because the first card we're going to jump into here is Always Watching, which is a really interesting card because traditionally you want to play Anthem effects with token strategies. That's really work best. You get multiple creatures out of every card that you play. And then you turn that into an additive bonus with your Anthem effects, so that way you end up with a greater bang for your buck overall. Makes a lot of sense. Always Watching is a stronger Anthem than most Anthems by giving your creatures vigilance, but the downside being it doesn't work with those token strategies. So you kind of have to figure out where else can I play an Anthem effect. And White Weenie is a pretty good strategy. Ignoring tokens makes it a lot more difficult, but that's why I wanted to show the Auras deck here. I don't think Always Watching would be an all-star in this deck, but it is certainly the type of deck that could play an Always Watching. Giving Vigilance to my creatures is a huge upside. Being an enchantment, obviously, is a huge upside for this deck. And we don't actually play tokens. Light Form and Cloud Form, they both manifest cards, but they do not actually put a token into play. So Always Watching would work pretty well in this deck. Myth Realized, again, not a token. So we have all these non-creatures that aren't actually tokens, which makes the Always Watching work. On the downside, of course, in this particular deck, we're probably light on creatures overall for that type of effect. But still, it's at least a direction you can go. But yeah, I would expect Always Watching to see quite a bit of standard play, but not the type of standard play that that Honor the Pure gets, where you have Honor the Pure basically makes you build a very, very specific type of deck. You have to be mono white, essentially, or you're not getting the effect. Always Watching, the mana hurts a little bit, but I think the mana is going to be good enough in standard that you might see a couple different varieties of Always Watching decks. There might be like a red-white Always Watching deck that kind of goes wide with smaller creatures for cheap amounts of mana. There might be a green-white Always Watching deck, kind of like the little kid style. A lot of those +1/+1 counter cards just stick around. And when the thing that Always Watching provides that is very important for those types of decks is that Vigilance allows those decks to beat up on smaller creature decks even harder, which is like super important because generally those types of decks are already attacking control pretty well. So now when they get to include a card in their main deck that's not like, a random life gain card or something like generic-y bad most of the time, they get to play something that is good most of the time and Always Watching that just happens to let them play defense. I think that's a pretty big advantage to those decks. So this is going to be, it's not going to spawn new decks necessarily, but there will certainly be decks that will pick this up. So some of these cards we're just going to skip over or like talk about very briefly, like Angel Deliverance here. I mean, it's a cool looking card. I'm sure it's great in EDH, but this condition, not only do you need to have Delirium, which is not pretty difficult, but it is difficult. It's not like given. Not only I gotta work my placement here. Okay. Not only do you need Delirium here, but you need to attack with this before you can actually exile the creatures. So I mean, that's kind of too big of a turnoff for me personally. Even as a brewer, I just don't want to spend that much mana and jump through that many hoops. So if that is you, I gotta pop this up too. If that's your thing, by all means, I'm sure it's actually pretty good in stand or in EDH or something like that though. Commander, excuse me. Angelic Purge is kind of an interesting card. I think it'll probably see a little bit of play. You can sacrifice any permanent, which is a key here, so you can get rid of a land. You can get rid of a used up something, I don't know, a Planeswalker that's about to die because you cast another one. It is a sorcery, so you can't respond to something, but the fact that it has such a versatile text box of hitting any creature, any artifact, or any enchantment makes this a really main deckable card if you can either turn that negative of sacrificing a permanent into a positive, or if you can just play a deck that doesn't care nearly as much. Like, for example, if you had Flagstones or Trocare or something in your deck, now Angelic Purge's downside is not nearly as big, and you kind of get an O-ring of sorts that has no downside to it in that it can't be blown up and the creature removed or whatnot, or brought back into play. So it's kind of this is one of those cards that probably won't see much play, but it offers some certain niche decks and decks that can figure out how to successfully mitigate the downside here. Gives them a pretty neat tool because this is effectively O-ring. It does not hit Planeswalkers, which is quite important. So you can't use this as like your O-ring replacement of sorts, your Banishing Light replacement. But it is something that you could potentially do as like a 1-of or a 2-of or a sideboard card in very niche decks. So again, it's just one of those cards that you pick up because it's a common and it's from the set and it might do something. This guy's nothing. I mean, not literally, he's a Geist, I guess, but so this is kind of an interesting card. It's very much a limited card, of course. You look at Bound by Moonsilver, and you're like, okay, it's a pacifism. But two things about this that kind of make it relevant. Transform is no longer just a werewolf mechanic. It is on all kinds of cards. I mean, that was already true to a certain extent, but now it's on. It seems like it's like pretty well dispersed across all the colors. So being able to prevent something from transforming could be quite relevant against more than just one or two cards in standard. There might be 5 or 10 cards in standard that want to transform. But in addition to that, sacrificing a permanent to move this around is again it's a downside. But if you have an extra land to spare and you want to play this on turn 3 to lock down your opponent's Death Mist Raptor, but then when they cast their 6 or 7 drop later on in the game, you don't have a removal spell for it. You can move this over, sacrifice a random land, sacrifice a useless creature that was used up, something like that, and that is just a huge bit of versatility. Now, it's not a card that you can just like willy-nilly throw in your deck and just get value out of. It's not like the Unmaking or whatever, where we're just here's Vindicate and you play it because you can pay 3 life. This is definitely a card that you need to know what you're doing with the card, and you need to have a purpose for it. So it probably won't see play early on in the format as things kind of settle in. But it is an interesting card to think about. It moving around pacifism. First of all, awesome card in that Aura's deck. This Aura's deck right here that I'm showing you. But the fact that it moves around. It's probably constructed playable for like a tutor. We're going to get to a tutor later on that grabs an equipment or an aura. And this is a pretty decent aura to grab defensively. So, just an interesting card. Also kind of cool artwork. I love Innistrad flavor. I don't know. It gets me excited. Even though a lot of it's, kind of boring or whatever. All right, we get to our first cool. I would say this is our first cool card. And it's not even like super cool. It's basically Mentor of the Meek, but you don't have to pay any mana up front. Instead, you're paying the mana afterward to draw cards because you're sacrificing clues. But it's a very similar card. It has upsides of being a flying creature, having a 3rd point of toughness, which is huge, and working for more creatures, I would say, in general. You have to cast creatures. You can't put tokens into play. But outside of that, very similar to Mentor of the Meek, which, saw constructed play, if you don't remember. It was quite a good card for a while. This, like I said, it's a little different. You're paying 2 to draw the card instead of 1, but you're paying it afterwards. So, I wanted to look at this card. I'm like, what stands out to me right now? Creatures with convert mana cost 3 or less, and there's a ton of options. By the way, this is nothing down here is actually free for Vanguard, but I threw it all in the same binder to make it a little easier on me. But here are some of the various 3 drops right now that are sticking around that might be playable. Obviously, I want to look at white stuff first. So you got like what's going on down here? I'm not even on Hidden Dragon Slayer. I'm on Kytheon. Oh, I see. It's because of this. Alright, I'll move you over a little bit. I didn't account for needing, because when I move back here, now it's going to be, oh, well, that's fine. Alright, so we got the Kytheon, who I think, is fine in this type of deck. The important thing to also note about Bygone Bishop is it overlaps with Collected Company. So, let me pull up Collected Company, just so, is it already up here? No, these are just creatures. So, oh, you can't mouse that. So both of these cards hit creatures with convert mana cost 3 or less, and Collected Company hits the Bygone Bishop itself. So you already have this kind of like built-in synergy. Collected Company is around, by the way. It sticks around for this rotation. So we have it for a little while longer. But you have this really interesting kind of build of synergy that's getting built in. Like you lose all the combo stuff. You lose the return everything from my graveyard and go off with Nantuko Husk and whatnot. But Collected Company is a strong enough card as just a value thing. You're getting a 2 for 1. You're saving a bunch of mana. Let's say you hit 2/3 drops. You obviously save 2 mana in that case. You got 2 cards out of 1. You got them at instant speed, which lets you do all kinds of wacky stuff on top of that. And now if you start coupling it with things like Bygone Bishop, which are rewarding you for doing the same thing of playing 3 drops, now you start stacking synergies up where your deck becomes more and more worthwhile. And by the nature of what Bygone Bishop does, you kind of building into this more resilient mid-range sacrifice my creatures for value and go through and dig and blah blah blah. Less of the combo deck that Rally the Ancestors is, and more of like a grindy kind of birthing pod type feeling deck. So these two cards combo up really nicely in that respect. And again, I wanted to look at chill out. I wanted to look at cards that work with this. It's important to note that every single morph works with Bygone Bishop. They don't all work with Collected Company because Collected Company sees the convert mana cost of the card's natural state, whereas Bygone Bishop sees the convert mana cost of the thing you're casting. So any morph does work with Bygone Bishop for that regard. But yeah, we have Kytheon here. I think Hidden Dragon Slayer is like a playable card if you're doing something like this. As I said, I'm thinking more of a kind of a grindy deck. So having cards that are actual removal in your deck that supply these conditions is awesome. Like when Hidden Dragon Slayer draws you a card effectively because of the Investigate, then and he's killing a creature and he's doing a 3/2 lifelink and whatnot. Like those are just qualities that add up really well and kind of let you build your own Siege Rhino, if you will. Now that Siege Rhino's gone, and Offenza makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it works with Collecting Company. I think this guy's fine. He sees so little play. I don't know why, but he could easily be playable in this deck. Just random stuff and Lantern Scouts. Nothing like. I was just looking through basically to kind of size up what we have going on here, and of course there's a ton of cards from the new set that can go in this deck too. And again, I don't want to skip ahead too much and talk about cards without having previewed them yet, so I'm going to wait and we'll talk about them later on. We'll talk about Bygone Bishop in respect to those cards, or in conjunction with those cards, how it works with those cards. But I wanted to go through and at least get an idea of what creatures. Another thing worth noting here: Dash works with Bygone Bishop because Dash reads you may cast this spell for its dash cost, and obviously Bygone Bishop says whenever you cast a creature spell with convert mana cost 3 or less. So Zurgo kind of super combos with Bygone Bishop. You can just pay 2 mana a turn to get your 2/2 on and throw a clue into play. So if you want to draw a card immediately, that's 4 mana a turn to draw a card and attack with your 2/2, which is it's a different style of deck than the kind of green-white idea I was having with probably like stuff like Undergrowth Champion and Death Mist Raptor and Elvish Visionary maybe, and Den Protector, of course, possibly Beast Caller Savant. I think this card is criminally underplayed and might start seeing more and more play now that allies can sort of be a thing. And I don't know, just the format's just changing, so there's less cards, and it'll be interesting to see if this guy picks up any play. But yeah, Sylvan Advocate's obviously a good card. Hydra's still around. Still got Nissa as well. I think this card also doesn't see any play right now, but it could pick up some play, especially in something like this. Not necessarily, it doesn't work with Collecting Company, so that's not great, but just being able to like give yourself Wrath protection out of the sideboard, for example, because these decks do tend to be weak to Wrath effects when you take them out before their card advantage engines start going on. So if you kill Bygone Bishop and whatever creature's chilling out there with it before they get to draw cards off their clues, before they get to build up a bunch of clues, then you're generally doing pretty well. You also have to deal with the Collected Companies that will eventually come out, but there's no Rally the Ancestors that just like is a single card win the game from that point on. Now the problem is it's generally pretty difficult to do that since all their cards are relatively cheap and they tend to have a lot of kind of resilience. Like for example, you do kill a turn 3 Bygone Bishop with a 1/4 removal spell, and then they play a Den Protector on the following turn, and you're just like right back to being screwed. So it's a difficult task to accomplish, but I think it's the best way to attack this type of deck. So yeah, we'll see. I think this guy's pretty interesting, despite looking rather simple. Again, 2/3 flyer is not the worst. That's constructed playable-ish. There will be a bunch of random 2/1 flyers and 2/2 flyers that this thing deals with. Not to mention it attacks planeswalkers. It's a spirit, which could be relevant. There's a bunch of things that care about spirits in the set, so. Talked about him a bunch. This dog is angry and has short legs. All right. Chaplain's Blessing is simple. Not much to talk about here, but it's very playable, I think. I mean, it's a sideboard card, of course, or if you're doing something weird and niche with life gain. But 1 mana to gain 5. We played Nourish back in the day, which was 2 mana gain 6, and we loved it. So this is perfectly fine. Consider it, it's not necessarily something you have to play, but It's worth thinking about. I love this cycle ish of spell spirits from the graveyard. So in the previous Innistrad, we had the guys that died into spirits. We had like the 2/2 that died into 2/1/1 flyers. We had the 1/1 that died into a 1/1 flyer. And this time around, they're like bigger up front, and you have to pay mana to get the 1/1 flyers, but they do it on command as a sorcery. So I think that these cards are playable almost inherently because of the text box, which is an effect that happens out of your graveyard without ever having to had cast the card. So if you're playing any type of dredge deck, and I have a list of things that mill and discard and whatnot, and we'll be revisiting this page pretty often, I'm sure, because one of the key features of Innistrad is that it has graveyard mechanics. So currently, without factoring in Innistrad, the cards in front of you are cards that actually interact with the graveyard, put things in your graveyard, whether it's off the top of your deck. I guess Collecting Company doesn't, so that's a lie. Steal it. Put that out there. I think I threw it in there because I have top on here, meaning interacts with the top of your deck. Although it's a little different. I have it in here just because it has some of the same feel. But yeah, these are cards that mill you, cards that force you to discard cards, and I guess cards that interact with the top of your deck. Because I think that stuff's going to be really important with Innistrad. So going back to Dauntless Cathar, we have a card here that if you do mill this, if you discard it to a Sim-Sig Icebreakers, if you discard it to an Oath of Jace, then you get a card that sits in your graveyard and can later on provide you value, or immediately, whatever, provide you value, which is something that most cards don't offer you. A 3-mana 3/2 is not good, but a 3-mana 3/2 that gets discarded to Oath of Jace is like strictly better than a Chandra Flamecaller getting discarded to Oath of Jace, even though Chandra Flamecaller is clearly a better card. So this card has a niche. Whether that niche will be something that players pick up on or not, I'm not sure. But I think it's a neat effect, so keep your eye on it. All right, Declaration in Stone. This is a big one. So I think if we learn how good clues are in Standard, this is going to be one of the cards that kind of tell us, because this card's going to have to see a bunch of play. It's 2 mana to Maelstrom Pulse away all creatures, but you exile them. So exiling away a creature for just 2 mana, just a single creature, is already a very, very strong effect. And obviously, the secondary clause of going and hitting every other card with that name is not going to come up infinite, but it will come up against token strategies or against random nut draws from your opponent and whatnot. And it is relevant, although it is not where the power of this lies. But 2 mana exile creature is great. Too strong, I would argue. But then the fact that they get to put clues into play for each one of these cards you kill is really interesting, because if they got to draw a card right away, this card would still probably see play. But it would not be good. It would be more of like a niche kind of, I'll run this as a 2/of to deal with, early creatures or something like that. I don't think you can necessarily run 4 of it. But the fact that your opponent has to spend 2 mana to get that card later on, how good is that? It's a really difficult thing to just put your finger on and be like, all right, we solved it. And it feels, because for against an aggro deck, for example, if you stop their nut draw by casting this on turn 2 and you take out 1 or 2 creatures, let's say just their best 2-drop, or you get lucky and take out 2 1-drops, whatever. If you stop their nut draw with that, you bought yourself time to get to the mid and late game, which is theoretically where your deck takes over, and then you get to do your thing, Wrath, draw cards, cast Planeswalkers, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you gave your opponent fuel that they can use to kind of rebuild in the mid to late game, which is the time that they typically run out of resources. That's the thing that aggro decks lack, is they invest so many resources in the early game that the mid game, late game comes around and they run out of steam and they don't have much in their top decking, blah, blah, blah. But if they get to now draw a card or two based on these clue stones that you give them, I call them clue stones, by the way. Clue stones are technically the artifacts for that tap for mana, and these are just clues. But whatever. But so if you give them a couple of clues and then they sacrifice them for cards, is that enough to get them back into the game? I doubt it because they still spent 4 mana on that, two or 4 mana on that, which means they probably didn't get a huge turn out of it. They probably had to like set up for a turn. And in addition to that, you just are online at that point. You have the ability to kind of stabilize and deal with whatever they're going to throw at you because you're that deck. So unless they're drawing like runner, burn spell, and you really got to cause your pants down or something, I feel like you're favored in that area. But then again, you look at Decoration in Stone against Control Mirrors, and now I'm like not near as excited. Like 2 mana kill your guy is very strong, so I'm enjoying that. But like now you're drawing a card, and all your cards are kind of equal strength and whatnot. And I'm not dealing with your Jutai because of this, because it's got it's a sorcery, things like that. So it has some interesting caveats about it. I think it's going to be a very strong card. I don't know whether decks will just straight out of the gate play 4 of it, or whether people are going to need to give feel for it. But 2 mana to exile a creature is just so strong. I just can't imagine this not seeing play. Again, this is not a card that goes in a specific deck. You can obviously play it in like investigate combo decks or whatever. But all right, need a drink. Just all this talking. Descend upon the sinful. So I guess all these graveyard things come up to matter again. Gather the Pack being a good one. Evolutionary Leap. Again, this is not a graveyard card. Just grab 6 on the top. All right, Collecting Company, you get re-added to the list based on my knowledge of expanding it. Descend upon the sinful. 6 mana. Exile all creatures. Boom. Playable card. Done. We had Final Judgment back in the day. If nope, stop. You stop it. I'll pull up the Final Judgment for all you. Oh, Final Judgment's gonna pull up because my filters. Do it. Come on. Oh, did I spelled? I bet you I spelled something wrong. There it is. Bam. 6 mana, exile all creatures. See, this is back in the day. We had to walk uphill in the snow. This is what we had to work with at Kamigawa, and I loved this card back then. Like, we didn't have Wrath for a while. Like, for some reason, like Wrath disappeared for a short while. And I think I can't even remember. There was some good reason, but Final Judgment was like important. Maybe it was just Soul Shift was a thing. I don't know. But Final Judgment, look at this beautiful artwork. Final Judgment was like a necessary card at the time, and I loved the card. I thought it was like super elegant, and I thought exiling things was strong enough to warrant it over Wrath. But the fact is, actually exiling things nowadays is significantly stronger than. Not Wrath, but stronger than like Day of Judgment, because there are a lot of dies triggers. There's a lot of regenerate. There's a lot of things like that where exiling the creatures actually does matter. So we actually, I would say, do have a real reason for exile. Obviously, back then you had soul ships and stuff, so it mattered then too. But then we have this entire additional line of, or paragraph, I should say, of text where we just get a 4/4 flyer if we have a graveyard full of stuff. So we don't need that text on there in order for this to be a playable card. But what that text does is turn this from just a straight Wrath effect to a win condition of sorts, to something that pressures Planeswalkers. It just gives a lot of versatility to the card, makes it a lot more appealing to main decks. So I think that, this is one of those cards that'll be like a 2 of in a lot of decks, in a lot of control decks, because they're still going to want to play cheaper sweepers to deal with aggressive decks, because this is not great at like answering a first wave of, the aggro red player or whatever. But still, really cool card. You don't need to trigger the Delirium, although if you're playing this, you're probably going to want to make a few card choices, a few decisions that add card types to your deck just to make it a little more playable. Adding the Oaths is a great way to get enchantments in your deck. They're legendary, so if you cast a second Oath, you get an enchantment in your deck, whether that's, Oath of Nis is great for that. Obviously, Oath of Jace is fine for that as well. You can also discard it to Oath of Jace in that case. So keep stuff like that in mind. The old Foxy. What does he say? 7 mana, do nothings. Ooh, we got the Eerie Interlude. So anyone that knows me knows I am a momentary blink connoisseur, if you will. I've been blinking things for decades. It's I don't know. It's a hobby of mine is to blink things. That's just what I love to do. But this card is interesting because normally the blink cards they. I mean, we had Ghostwave before. Let me pull up Ghostwave again for all you kids that don't know. Don't know the ways of the past. Ghostway. Exile each creature you control. You return those cards to the battlefield under the owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So it's very, very similar. The key difference being that this can get around your tokens, so you don't have to feel bad about making tokens because they don't just die, because you get to choose any number of creatures you control. So you can skip the tokens and leave them in play, which makes it combo much better with cards that put tokens into play. For example, Cloudgoat Ranger with Ghostway. If I play Cloudgoat Ranger and then I Ghostway it, I end up with essentially no benefit. Now, obviously, if the 3 tokens had died or something like that along the way, then I get benefit out of it. But if I just cast Cloudgoat Ranger Ghostway, I end up in the exact same spot as if I cast Cloudgoat Ranger. In Eerie Interlude world, if I cast Cloudgoat Ranger and Eerie Interlude, I don't target my 3 tokens. I just target my Cloudgoat Ranger and I end up with 6 tokens. So obviously, we're already working with a significant upside there. Now, I wanted to look at things that work with Eerie Interlude because I think this is one of the more interesting cards in the set. It works with a lot of different things. So I have a couple of like almost deck lists, and then I just have a random assortment of cards here. But some of the cooler things it works with, Goblin Dark Dwellers is important to mention because you can. Obviously, if you can cast Goblin Dark Dwellers, target the Eerie Interlude in your graveyard, target the Goblin Dark Dwellers with the Eerie Interlude. At the end of the turn, Dark Dwellers comes back into play and choose a different sorcery or instant or whatever. So what that allows you to do is get a free Eerie Interlude for everything else in play that you at the time that you cast the Goblin Dark Dwellers. So that's a pretty cool little combo. The Knight's kind of cool. Anafen's is cool. Things come back into play at the same time, so you get to bolster a bunch. Linvala's fine, I guess, if you're playing that kind of deck. One of the cool. Can I pull it down here? We didn't. We find it. Maybe I did. Alright. One of the cool little interactions that I saw with this was a white-blue. I built red. Yeah, I just built this, I guess. So this, I guess, is where I ended up getting the list. I had blue in here for a while. I think I actually moved to the sideboard. Yeah, I did. Because of Reflector Mages and some other stuff. Whirler Rogue was an idea. But this is kind of a white-red humans list, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But it works really well with Eerie Interlude. A lot of these cards do, so I wanted to pull it up. You have Abbot of Carol Keep, which works kind of cool. Obviously, you get the trigger at the end of the turn, so that's important to remember. So you can't cast sorceries, lands, creatures with it, but you can cast an instant. So, better than nothing. All of our Thopter makers are pretty cool. Thopter Engineer being, you get a free 1/1 and Gear Grafter as well. Again, that kind of works like the Cloudgoat Ranger I was mentioning. Fire Mantle Mage his ability is not very good at the end of the turn, so ignore him. Lantern Scout, same thing. Pia and Kira Nalar, on the other hand, that's a good one. That's a good one to copy. Let's see, I should have an Allies deck. This is the first list I thought of when I thought of Arena Loop was like, let's play Allies, because one of the cards that jumps out to me when I think about Allies is Calastria Healer. So putting a bunch of tokens into play with Calastria Healer is like an awesome limited strategy, and theoretically it could be good in Constructed, was my idea at least. You have Cutthroat to usher them out the door with some pinging, and then you have Calastria Healer to usher them in the door with some pinging. And on top of that, you just have like a lot of good allies right now. Lantern Scout, I think, is a very strong card that Lifelink just beats a lot of decks, and if this coupled with this and this, it's just going to give you so much life against aggro. You're just not going to lose. Oath of Gideon is option. It puts a couple allies into play, which triggers all your allies' things. It works with Gideon by giving it an extra counter, so that way you can ultimate this and keep it around. Again, it gets you a enchantment in your graveyard for Delirium, if that's something you're interested in. Drana is just very good right now. You have 1-drops. Expedition Envoy is not like something that I would be super excited about, but he's in here again because he's a human. We're going to talk about a card later on, the new champion. What's his name? Champion of... I can't remember. The 1-mana 1/1 that gets +1/+1 kind of whenever you cast a human. He's the new version of him. We're going to get to him shortly. And so I included a lot of cards in these decks that are humans because he would be in this list if he was on Magic Online. He is not on Magic Online, but I will mention him shortly because he works really well with Eerie Interlude. Actually, I'll just go down now just so I can know his name because I don't know it all. I don't know all the cards' names off the top of my head yet. Don't worry, we'll be going back up. I'm not going to skip all these cards. I don't know his name, so I have to like read every text box. Here he is. Thalia's Lieutenant. Champion of the Parish. That was a card. Now, all the card names just came rushing back in my head as soon as I saw Thalia's Lieutenant. Human Soldier, 1/1, enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counter for each other human you control. So it works as a late game top deck, which Champions of the Parish did not. And then also... Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, he acts as an Anthem, effectively, which Champion of the Parish did not. And then he has the Champion of the Parish effect on top of him. So, you know, if you play him on turn 2, you don't have to feel bad about not getting his first ability because he's going to grow himself. So you kind of got this win-win. It works especially well with Eerie Interlude because Eerie Interlude sees all those things come into play simultaneously. So he gets big and all your other stuff gets big. So if you have 3 other humans, he becomes a 4/4. All your other humans get +1/+1 simultaneously. So you get the best of both worlds, which is awesome. So, you know, he works really well with allies because most allies are humans. You have Expedition Envoy here, which is one. You have Zulaport Cutthroat here is one. Obviously Blade Whirl. Drana is not. These technically are, but I guess they're not the core, so I lied. Lantern Scout is, does this guy make humans? He makes knight allies. He is a human himself, but that doesn't really help. Then you have things like Ally Encampment, which lets you bounce an ally, which again could be a human, replay it. So the thought here being that he could be a pretty strong 2-drop in this type of shell. There is a little card over here that I haven't got to yet that I was gonna wait on, that I was kind of hiding. March from the Tomb. People have been sleeping on this card. Everyone forgot about it. Or maybe just no one ever looked at it in the first place. I don't know. But it's a super interesting effect where we're returning any number of allies from our graveyard to play that have a total convert mana cost of 8. So when you're working with Calastra Healer and you're working with... we're done with the human guy for now, so just keep him in your mind. I can only pull up one card at a time. When we're working with Eerie Interlude, and we're working with all these enters the battlefield effects, it's really, really important to be able to fight sweepers by having a backup plan or having a way to make your deck resilient to them. And this does that. For 5 mana, you're going to reset your entire combo. So you're going to get back out 1 to 2 Calastra Healers, maybe a Zulaport Cutthroat, and maybe a Core Blade Whirl, or 2 Expedition Envoys. Or maybe you just get back a Drana, a Lantern Scout, and 1 Calastra Healer. In almost all cases, you're going to be getting 3 creatures minimum, and you can get up to 5 or 6 creatures, depending on what your graveyard is. There'd be other cards here that obviously, this is not a full deck list, of course. This is kind of just a shell. But the idea just being, we've been pinging our control opponent with Calastra Healer. We've been pinging them with Zulaport Cutthroat when they're just trying to 1-for-1 and 2-for-1 us. And we got them to 6-7 life, and they finally dealt with everything, and they're feeling good. A single March of the Tomb resolves on that turn they tap out, and now the problem exists all over again, on top of things like Gideon, which are kind of resilient. I have an Omnix listed here because of the Oath of the Gideon. I thought it was kind of interesting that it comes in with 6 and can go double -3. So, but yeah, it's an interesting little idea for a deck, I think. Eerie Interlude being an important card for the deck. You also get to save your creatures from Wrath with Eerie Interlude, which is really worth noting. So whether your opponent's trying to exile them or destroy them or do whatever, you can cast the Eerie Interlude response, exile your whole team, the Wrath resolves, everything comes back at the end of turn, and you're good to go. So Eerie Interlude just plays a really pivotal role in any of these decks that are trying to do, creaturey trickiness, I guess is the best way to put it. All right, let's move down. What do we got here? We got a 5-mana 2/4. No, thank you. We got this card's probably playable, although it is not exciting. I would imagine this is like a 1 of or a 2 of in like some random token strategy. It's not ethereal guidance. He's got what is this guy? This looks like the Titanic. Like, all right, moving on. This card might be playable, but it would be you probably need the investigate needs to matter. Getting the clue needs to matter. So you need like something counting your clues or whatever. There are some of those cards that we'll get to later on the set, but outside of that, ignore. Griff's Boon, a niche card that again I'm gonna re-pull up my Blue-White Allies deck because it would be perfect in it, or not my Blue-White Allies, my Blue Auras deck. This card being 1 mana. Aura, and +1/+0 and flying is already playable in my deck to a certain degree. But the fact that it comes back from your graveyard is just really, really nice. Works well with things like Helm of the Gods, which is still sticking around. Keep that in mind. So if you're trying to look at any type of deck like this is one of the cards that might help you. Unfortunately, we're losing Cloud Forms and Light Forms, which is a sad day because those are very, very key to the deck. But Griff's Boon might be one of the things that keeps the deck afloat. So just keep that in mind. It's also just kind of like an interesting, grindy, graveyard-based card. If you have ways to discard it, you can return it. Do some tricky things. You only can do it as a sorcery, so you can't do anything on your bonus turn. But let me write down that guy's. I have this note section over here. I need to remember to use it. What was that guy's name? Lieutenant. She's gonna come up again. I know it. Thalio's lieutenant, that's right. Oh, why am I writing an opposite word? The human dude. My notepad. I don't expect to use a notepad too much, but for the new set cards, because they're not a Magic Online, keeping track of names and stuff, it's kind of good just to have access to that. So yeah, Griff's Boon, like I said, interesting card. The artwork's awesome. But yeah, don't sleep on these little small effects that have really abusable abilities like this. Like anything like say coming back from the graveyard is something you can take advantage of. Hope Against Hope. I'm sure this is like playable, but it's kind of risky. Like you need to be playing a deck that goes wide and wants to cast a aura on you, like a token, because usually if you're going wide, you're casting tokens. So now we're like risking it against, I don't know, just for all removal. The first strike should not matter if you're playing this in Constructed because you're getting a giant bonus. I mean, the card's fine. There could easily be a deck that sees play, but in general, if you're going to play this effect, just play an Anthem. You're going to get the same bonus, but better most of the time. 5-mana kill a dude? Nope. Not playing that. Does anybody like a 2/5 Vigilant Ox in there? He's like bringing guillotines with it. What's going on here? Oh, he's the Inquisitor's Ox. I get it. I get it. All right. Nope. Nope. Ooh, we got Militant Inquisitor. This is the guy. This is the guy's Ox. This is the guy with the Ox. Now we know. Look, there's no Ox in his art because the Ox is back here pulling the guillotines. All right, Inquisitor, super simple common that you might write off as being limited only, and you'd probably be right. You probably are right, but I'm Conley Wood, so I'm going to put my neck on the line and talk about him in Constructed. I pulled up, I lumped in auras with the equipment, but I can just, because there's not a bunch of equipment. Here, I'll just type in equipment so you can see. So you don't think that I'm lying to you. Obviously, again, there are cards in the new set that are not. Where is Dragon's Charge? There it is. There are cards in the new set that are equipment that we'll get to at the end of the day that we'll reference back to. But as of now, as of right now, these are the equipment that we have access to in Standard and the things that work with equipment. This is literally the entire list. Down here, I pulled down the cards I thought were more interesting, but we're not working with a lot here. We got our bone saws. We got Captain's Clause, which I think is actually quite a playable card. The fact that it makes allies could very much matter. The fact that it just makes creatures at all could very much matter, especially if we're running the +1/+1 if you have a bunch of creatures guy. It does work with Stoneforge Masterwork. That's something that you can get advantage out of. Putting a 1/1 core ally into play, even if it's just going to get automatically blocked. If you have a Stoneforge Masterwork in play, it gives you an additional +1/+1 that combat as well. So there are some synergies to it. In general, an interesting card that I think should see more play. And maybe there's enough equipment matters stuff to get that to happen. We have Weapons Trainer, which I think is very, very playable. 2 mana, 3/2 is like fine, and you don't even need to have an equipment on anything to get this bonus. So it's just like an Anthem, like very, very playable. I think. Acolyte, I'm not sure about being playable. I guess maybe he is. He is again an ally. He's going to look for equipment. You need to be playing a lot of equipment for the play, like probably 16 or something like that to really want to play this guy. But what else do we have? We have Helm of the Gods. Again, I'm a big fan of, obviously. Relic Seeker. Stoneforge Mystic, this is not, but it is a rare that tutors up equipment, so there's that. No, he honestly is probably quite playable because he's a 2/2 that becomes a 3/3 after the first hit. So if you have, if you're playing the tutor, let me pull up the tutor's name as well. Tutor Open Armory. Because a lot of our kind of cards we're going to talk about for the rest of the day are kind of based in this world. Oh, I left out of the. If you're playing Open Armory, which tutors up an aura or an equipment, again, you can tutor up like a pacifism effect or something like that. You can be playing pacifism effects, which gets something like Relic Seeker in a little bit more regularly. And then you get this guy in, and you get your Helm of the Gods, or you get your Captain's Clause, or you get your Stoneforge Masterwork. What other equipment is there that's really noteworthy? Oh, Sword of the Animist is a good one. This one's legendary, so this one's especially good to tutor up, but you probably can only run 2 or 3 of it in your deck. But this, again, thins lands on your deck, which is nice. Ramps you mana, gives you +1/+1, which is fine. But in general, the equipment aren't going to get you very big. There's not a lot of like gigantic boosted equipment. Let me quickly look at... Let me see if I'm missing any crazy equipment from the new set that I really need to tell you about right now. I don't think I am. Oh, there is Murderer's Axe. Murderer's Axe, I think, is interesting in that it's a free equipment because it equips by discarding a card. But it costs 4 mana, so it's like not great in any type of aggressive equipment-based thing necessarily. Outside of that, though, there's like Slayer's Plate, which is a big equipment, but it costs 3 mana to play and 3 mana to equip, which is just not very good. All the equipment that are interesting and sleek are basically on your page. Like I said, Helm of the Gods, Stoneforge Masterwork, again, 1 and then 2 to equip. This is 2 and 1 to equip. This is 1 and 1 to equip. That's why I think those are probably the biggest standout ones. Bonesaw is very playable, I think, especially if you're running Weapons Trainer. And then we also have, he didn't show up here. We have Kazul's Toll Collector. Who, if you are going to run more expensive equipment, he is a potential candidate to include in the deck because he is fast mana in a certain way. If you're playing enough equipment where you get 4+ mana out of his activation over a game, that could be worth playing as a 3 mana 3/2, which is normally not good enough. But if you play him and you equip a Slayer's Plate and a Helm of the Gods and a Sword of the Animist all for free, now all of a sudden he's looking pretty awesome, obviously. So he's something worth mentioning that has never seen constructed play to my knowledge. And like this guy I said is probably worth mentioning. He just seems, kind of legit. Everything else down here I have is kind of based for the Aura deck that works with the Open Armory. But yeah, this particular Militant Inquisitor, again, he doesn't need you to have equipment on him, which is the reason I think he is at least fringe playable. If you're running 16 plus equipment in your deck, and you play this guy and he's a 4/3 every time, that at least we're starting to get into the realm of playability. If he's a 5/3 for 3 every time, now we're talking about like, you know, a legitimate strong card, because then he has equipment laying around to be picked up and put on him, so he's something worth at least discussing. You know, he's of course not A1 All-Star pure steel paladin, but he's something. So there he exists. I did my duty. I talked about him. 2/2, sometimes flyer. No, thank you. This Machinations, interesting card, but I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me in constructed. Too much mana. The indestructible on attack is not as relevant as it is in limited. This guy, on the other hand, I am both excited for him in limited and constructed. He matches up with my expectation of the last guy, which is the spell-like effect of casting the 1/1s out of your graveyard. This guy gives you 2 for 3 mana, which is, you know, sorcery speed. That's already a playable card. I've played that in constructed. 2 mana, cast 2 1/1 flyers. Or 3 mana, cast 2 1/1 flyers. But this also gives you up front a 4 mana 3/1 lifelink, which by itself would not be constructed playable, but it is something that will matter and will affect the battlefield. Like, gaining 3 life a turn is not something most decks can just allow you to do. Trading with a 3 toughness creature that, you know, and gaining 3 life is awesome because then you also get 2 flyers. And this thing's a human that turns into spirit, so it's got the dual creature type thing mattering. I don't know. This card is like, I just think it's awesome. I don't think it's like going to be, you know, Siege Rhino necessarily, but it's kind of is Siege Rhino because, you know, 3 life both ways is generally what you're going to try to get out of this, and then you get 2/1s later on. So it kind of has that feel of like a bunch of random stuff coming at you that you just kind of don't want to deal with. Like, you're getting drained, you're getting attacked, you're getting card advantaged, you're getting life gained back, and it's just I don't know. It's an interesting card to think about. It of course is reasonable in the graveyard decks that just want to. Dump a bunch of stuff in the yard. Here's a bunch of this is all stuff that works with graveyard stuff. I just pulled it out. A little different than the mill stuff because this is like anything that works with the graveyard. Yeah, interesting card. I like him. Not forgotten. Also an interesting card. Probably playable. Not really worth talking about. This guy, I'm not so. This has existed in enchantment form before for 4 mana. In the last Ravnica, what the hell was the name of that? I'm not going to look it up. It doesn't matter. But it was not good. Is the point I'm getting at. This is a creature, so he's going to get the bonus. He's going to get the bonuses himself, which is interesting. I'm not really sure what to think about him. I tried to look at like what decks to build around and whatever, but to be honest, outside of looking strikingly like George Clooney holding a lightsaber, this guy is not super inspiring to me. I don't know why I don't get behind this effect. I know there are players out there that love this type of effect. I don't know. It's just not my thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all you players that love this guy. I'm sure maybe eventually I'll work on a deck with him. He's not tickled my fancy yet. All right, Open Armory. I love this card personally. I think it's like just versatile enough. Obviously, it works with this deck perfectly. Like this I'm so sad that most of this deck's rotating because being able to grab your Helm of the Gods or grab a Pacifism or grab a Cloud Form or grab a Light Form or grab a Stasis Snare, like it is, I would have killed for all that. Or I guess it can't grab a Stasis Snare, but I would have killed for no. It can't grab a Light Form or a Cloud Form either. I lied. All right, maybe it wouldn't have been as good in this deck. I probably would have played like 1 or 2 copies. Cloud Form and Light Form don't become auras until they're in play, so this technically would not have worked for them. I'm glad I caught that before this week, because everyone in the chat would have been like, you can't grab Cloud Form. I know how you guys work. But Open Armory is just a really cool card. 2 mana is perfectly reasonable for a tutor. You know, at 1 mana, this card would be probably modern playable. I don't know for what, but like 1 mana tutors are just they scare me. They're very strong. 2 mana makes this probably standard playable if you have valid targets for it. And I think that the range of stuff here being auras and equipment, with auras having versatility in and of themselves, like you get your pacifism effect, and then you also get your Sage's Reverie effect that draws you cards, and you also get your you know, random value enchantment like the Griff Spoon up here. You know, you maybe want 1 copy of Griff Spoon in your deck, and you don't want to invest in additional copies because it's just kind of a do nothing after some point. Maybe you just want to tutor it up with Open Armory. So a really interesting card. Obviously, kind of fits in where it fits in. But maybe look at some new decks that you would not have looked at because this exists, because it adds consistency to strategies that might not otherwise be consistent. 4/2 first striker sometimes. No. This card's Puncturing Light here is definitely playable. Probably very, very niche, but it's worth thinking about. You generally are going to have better options than this, but it's not the worst. Excuse me. Again, probably very, very niche playable. If you sack like 30 million creatures in one turn, you win the game. That's cool, but Delirium's difficult to trigger, and a 5-mana 3/3 flyer is just not anywhere close to good enough on its own. 4-mana, next snap, gain 3 life, blah. Spectral Shepherd's interesting. So this is not as good as Drog Skull Captain or whatever it was, the blue-white Spirits get Shroud and +1/+1. That card was absurd. But this kind of has a similar effect. Bouncing Spirits to your hand is interesting. If you're bouncing a what's his name? Ghost Shackle Chains or something like that. We'll get to him when we get to blue. He's colorless blue, 2/1 flash, comes into play, gives the Spirit Shroud, and your spirits have flash. He works with Spectral Shepherd, kind of interesting way. But I don't know, 3-mana 2/2 flyer also turns me off about the card. And then having such a high mana cost to return spirits. I'm sure this was needed because it's just a good limited card. And you just kind of need to balance it and make it applicable for limited. But for constructed, I don't know. It'll probably see very, very niche play, if any at all. But interesting. Always interesting. Ooh, we got the Madness Enabler here. The Stern Constable. Look how stern this guy is. This is the sternest constable of all done. Just look at that face. Just look at it. If you had a Stern off with the Stern Constable, you would lose. You would not be able to outstern this guy. Howard Stern could not outstern this guy. All right. So I want to bring this guy up just because he's a 1-mana tapper. No mana cost required. But the previous 1-mana tapper we've seen that saw constructed play required mana, which is usually better than discarding a card. Like you would rather spend 1 mana than discard a card because a card's worth more than 1 mana typically. But if you're actually trying to hold off an aggressive swarm in the early game, having a mana cost of 1 means you can't cast things on curve. So I can't go 1-mana tapper, 2 mana do this thing and tap your guy. 3 mana, stasis snare your thing and tap your guy. 4 mana, cast my planeswalker, tap your guy. I don't get to do that anymore because I made the sacrifice of investing a white mana into my tapper every single turn. So if I want to get the value out of my tapper, I need to give up the advantage that I have mana-wise, which is kind of frustrating. Now, Stern Constable asks you to do something different, which is discarding the card. That is... Excuse me. I was talking. That is a cost that you can't pay very often. 4 turns in, you can't be still tapping a guy by discarding a card. But if you need to get 1 or 2 turns of reprieve, that you need to hit your 2-drop mana play, you need to hit your 3-drop mana play, whatever that is. Maybe it's a draw spell or something. This card allows you that, while also providing you a bunch of cool benefits like enabling your graveyard, enabling madness. Obviously, we're going to get to a bunch of madness cards later on. White is not a madness color. But just discarding cards to fill up for delirium and madness is value. So again, if you could turn this guy's negative into any sort of positive, you're working with a great card. If you can just stomach his negative for a turn or two to buy you the couple of early turns and then chump block with him or whatever, you're doing good. He's a human and he's super stern. I'm sure you have a story. Everyone has a story. You can tell it to the bars. He's the sternest. All right, where we go. I like this card a lot. I don't think it's great, but it's playable. I think it's more playable and constructed than most Giant Growths would be. +2/+2 is worse than +3/+3, but not so much so that knocks it out of the running. And then you get that +1/+1 bonus back, sort of, in a 1/1 white human soldier creature. You need an equipment, but in all these decks we're talking about, again, we pull up the equipment deck. In this deck, for example, I'm just going to cut this card because if I do that, I get to see equipment, and there's only one card. If you're playing it in this deck or whatever, you get a 1/1 out of this. So now if your guy dies, you still have something to throw on your Captain's Claws on, which will then make more 1/1s and kind of go off from there. It's also a human soldier, so it works well with Stoneforge Masterwork by giving you a 1/1 creature at instant speed. So they block my weapons trainer. That has a Stoneforge Masterwork on it. I give it +2/+2. Obviously, it's going to survive probably because of that anyway. But if it doesn't, it gets an additional +1/+1 because I added a human to the board. And, just a lot of little synergies. Giant Growths are not the most constructed playable card, but an interesting one. Survive the night. I love the flavor on this card, but I don't know how she's indestructible. Seems like, whatever. I'm gonna move on. Tenacity, probably playable, I guess. +1/+1 and lifelink is legit at instant speed. If you're playing a token strategy, pretty much is the only thing this is going to be good in. Like a sideboard card, I guess. Untapping the creature is not the most relevant, but you can occasionally get a gigantic blowout in combat. But unlike limited, you're not guaranteed to be just running creature into creature mirrors all day long. So this is mostly good in a token deck that wants to use it proactively to gain life against like a burn deck or something. Mostly a sideboard card, I would imagine. By the way, I realize it now because I have illusory gains on my little preview pane over here, and it is a great one to grab with the open armory because it's a defensive aura. Much like Passivism, but it has a huge impact in the late game, which is awesome. And then you can also combo it up with what's it called? Oh, I'm gonna write this one down too. Nope, not that one. Actually, I'm probably not gonna write this one down because this is the last time we're gonna get to it. Where are you, Passivism card? Bound by Moon Silver. So if you're illusory gains in Bound by Moon Silver deck, you can actually get away with this because for a couple reasons. A, you could sacrifice the creature that you illusory gains to move Bound by Moonsilver around so that your opponent can't get anything back ever if you really want to do that. B, if they do move things around in such a way that your Bound by Moonsilver is no longer on a valid target, you can move it around, and then illusory gains be moving around, and blah blah blah. So that's kind of like a nice little combo in the aura world that we're painting here. Because again, this is without much of the context of the rest of the set. I think this is one of the cooler little synergies that White has going on. Is all these equipment and aura cards in the set, and how they kind of add value to the previous ones. All right, so now we're back down to Thalia's Lieutenant, which we've already talked about quite a bit. I do have this deck is a humans deck built for this dude. So there's too many cards here, of course. But the idea being that Champion of the Parish is very, very strong 1-drop. Thalia's Lieutenant is a very strong 2-drop that works basically forwards and backwards. So how could I take best advantage of that? Lantern Scout is a great card with it. You just get so much life out of this card alone, not to mention everything else it's attacking. Lightning Berserker is a great card with it again. Dash works with Thalia's Lieutenant. Every time I dash out a Lightning Berserker, I'm just going to get a +1/+1 on this guy. Not to mention Lightning Berserker is just a good card in an aggressive deck, I would say. Pia and Kira, great. Hixus is probably playable. I don't know, but he's a human, so I pulled him out as an option. Fire Mantle Mage, giving your guys menace, especially when Thalia's Lieutenant's going to get so big. Pretty valuable. You got Kytheon, who's the human, who's doing his Planeswalker-y thing early on, and again, it's going to help out the Lieutenant. You have this Lieutenant, you have the other Lieutenant. You got Thalia's Lieutenant doing selfish things, and you got Consul's Lieutenant. I guess they both give your creatures the same +1/+1, so I guess Thalia's Lieutenant's just better at his job, probably. I don't know. So we got First Strike on here, which is relevant, but the bigger thing just is a creature that also provides an Anthem effect. When you have Thalia's Lieutenant in your deck, now we add Consul's Lieutenant. We could also add the very top card. What is it called? I don't know. Let me go check. I'm going to pull it up on this other page. Always Watching, the +1/+1 to all non-token creatures and vigilance. Like that deck, that card works excellent in this deck because everything, well, not everything, most of the things are non-tokens. There's a few in here with Thought Engineers, which I'm not even sure is necessary. But if you start stacking these anthems, the lieutenant, the other lieutenant, the always watching, you end up with just like a real, and I guess Gideon's ability, his ultimate. You just end up with a lot of power in every individual card you play. So now I'm playing Kytheon as a 4/3 that gets indestructible, and he's just much more annoying. I'm playing a 4/3 first striker. I'm playing a dashed in, 3/3 or 4/4 lightning berserker. My Pia and Kira Nalar is now making gigantic token. Oh, I guess in this case it doesn't make gigantic tokens since always watching and Thalia's lieutenant doesn't affect it. But it would have been awesome if it did work that way. Let's just imagine like it did. Okay. But yeah. Well, so once you start stacking these synergies up, that's how this type of deck kind of comes out of nowhere. And lieutenant just does all those things perfectly. Being a 2-mana card, being great early, being great late, being a creature. I think just perfect set of recipes, perfect set of skills. This guy should be a big one. Thraben Inspector, on the other hand, probably not going to be a big one, but does work with the Eerie Interlude deck. He's a 1-drop that effectively draws you a card, so he's kind of got that Elvish Visionary-ish feel to him. He's a human, if that matters for your Lieutenant deck. Not the most exciting of cards, but he's worth thinking about. Or she. I can't tell. I think that's a he. I don't know. He's got an Emrakul hand. It's got an Emrakul hand, so that's all that matters. Topplegeist. I love this thing. Except it's creepy as hell. But look at this. It's like, if you saw this in your dream, you would not go back to bed. You would just be up the rest of the night. Topplegeist is really cool because it's a flying man with multiple relevant abilities. So entering the battlefield and tapping an opponent, it's a creature already good. Like if I'm playing a Spirit aggro deck, and my opponent's likely to have like 1 flying blocker or 1 reach blocker, and that's it. So this already has a very relevant ability that puts it over the top of Flying Man, where I'm just like casting my 1-mana 1/1 flyer, tapping a creature for the turn, getting in there. But then if I have Delirium, I get to do that every single turn and prevent your creature from attacking. It's at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. There are 4 more card types. So I get to prevent your creature from attacking or blocking every turn while I have a 1-mana 1/1 flying dude pecking away at you. Not to mention I got a trigger when it came into play. That's like a crazy amount. Like I get a pacifism, a 1/1 flyer, and a tap trigger for 1 mana. Like, obviously there are a ton of conditions that need to go right for those things to happen, for that card to come together. But that is so much value out of your 1 mana. It's just like this card is like crazy strong. I think you need to find a home for it. Spirits is a very likely deck. I couldn't really pull up a Spirits deck on Magic Online, unfortunately, because most of the good Spirits are in the new set. But I will go ahead and pull up the few Spirits that we have in current standard. Anoffense is a big one. It's a ground spirit, but obviously curving something like Topplegeist into this or this into Topplegeist is great. You get 2/2 flyers, so a very relevant card to think about going forward. Blessed Spirits is probably not strong enough, but I tried it in the Aura deck and I wasn't impressed. But it might be good enough now that enough stuff's rotating. What is this? No, it's not good. Not good, not good. So yeah, these are pretty much the only 2 that are relevant, I would say. Tower Geist might be relevant. Probably not. But yeah, Spirits in the new set, a ton of new good stuff. So keep your eye on it. Topplegeist, hopefully I sold you on it. I don't have a specific deck yet for it, but it's an exciting one, I promise. The Unruly Mob is back. Not good enough for... Actually, without Rally the Ancestors in Standard, this guy's probably not good enough. Let me double check that. Make sure I'm not talking my butt. Yeah, we have a bunch of Rally cards, but no Rally the Ancestors. But yeah, without Rally the Ancestors in the format, I doubt this guy will be seeing in play. He doesn't really do much. Hey, look, White Spirits. This is kind of... The Vessel is probably too expensive for Constructed. The effect's nice. He gets an enchantment in the art or whatnot, but 5 total mana to get 2/1 Spirits is just... it's a bit much. That's the end of the white cards? Wow. It was like the end there kind of fell off. I got all excited about Topplegeist thinking there was another one coming. And the Vessel just was a big letdown. All right, well, it's okay because we have more cards. We're going to be right back with artifacts, and then I'm going to round things out with land cards. You are watching the Shadows over Innistrad set review. I'm Conley Woods. This is TCGplayer.com. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching.